turn it over to Tara, who's going to have a more in-depth discussion of actually looking for those symptoms and dealing with it before you wind up as something like the WSIB, or as Marty's going to address, look into cases of damages. So Tara, if I can ask you to come up now.
Thanks, Megan. So I'd like to start with some introductions today. The kind of people that we meet every day. Two people, Jane and Max. We'll start with Jane. Jane is a staple of the company. She's been working here 11 years. 2 kids, she's 47 years old, and this is her second marriage. Jane works in the mailroom. She is friendly and knows everyone's name. 2 years ago, she received some unfortunate news, a breast cancer diagnosis. She is presently on her 3rd round of chemotherapy treatment, but she's back at work and looks a little bit shaky. At lunch last week, it came up with the managers that Jane was going through a tough time physically, and that she had been open about her physical sickness with others at work. What do we do? The managers asked. It didn't take long for people working in the company to come up with some fairly good answers. They actually sprang into action. Friends from work brought over some home-cooked healthy meals. A basket of goodies and flowers were sent from management to her home. People have been sharing with Jane their encouraging stories. HR has met with her already to see if she needs time off or if there's anything else they can do to smooth things while at work. Jane herself has already asked that all the heavy lifting in the mailroom be shifted over to some of her coworkers until she gets her strength back. Her supervisors have been made aware that she will take frequent bathroom breaks and have her desk set up closer to the restroom. Jane gets an extended lunch break for now and can use the sick room, which contains a cot for her to rest. She has spoken to her fellow employees about what she is going through and the supports in place, and they know about the temporary work accommodations. Jane has spoken with her doctors and feels pretty confident that she should be back to her regular self in 4 weeks' time. She will meet every week with her supervisors to monitor how things are going, and will also meet with HR when the 4 weeks are up and see about long-term goals. So that's Jane. Now we'll discuss Max. Max is head of IT. He's 31 years old, married with 3 children. He has been working at the company for 7 years. Max rose fairly quickly through the ranks and is known as a bit of a perfectionist. He's on the quiet side, a little reserved, polite, but he gets the job done. We have been noticing something lately. He has seemed even quieter, introverted, distant. There are rumors of trouble at home and whisperings of depressive episodes back in college in his 20s. He has been heard to bark at his coworkers suddenly, and there are unexplained absences in the day and gaps in his work. His name came up the other day at a management meeting, which he missed. What do we do? What do we do? They asked again. This time, silence. Well, I can tell you what we have been doing in the past. We mostly ignored it for the time being. You see, we hope it will get better. The truth is, we very often really haven't a clue of what to do. We like Max, he's a good guy, and we don't want to hurt him. If he is going through a tough time personally, the last thing we want is to make it harder for him. But what if it doesn't get better? What if it gets worse? And what if the whole department starts to falter? And do we really know what's wrong? Do we really know what's going on? These are some of the issues I would like to discuss today. I think for the most part, we want to do the right thing when it comes to the treatment of employees, but we have a lot of uncertainty. We really don't know the best course of action in the case of mental illness. What if I get involved and it's the wrong thing to do, and I later regret it? What if I get involved and do the wrong thing despite my best intentions? What if I was wrong about what the problem was in the first place? Remember the last time I got involved with something similar? It all turned out pretty badly. And I think that if I do nothing, the problem will go away on its own or get handled quietly, privately, not affecting others, and I'll never hear about it again. Well, you can rub the sleep from your eyes and the dream from your mind, because chances are this is not going to go away, and unless you address it in the appropriate way, things are actually likely to get worse. So you choose to do nothing despite hunches that there is a mental health problem, or you pass it on to somewhere else and someone else where you know the matter will die. Then what? Whatever relationship you had with the employee now becomes more strained. The things that the employee no longer does as they should get picked up by other employees who feel responsible to cover for their coworker. This can then create a whole other host of resentments among coworkers and others. Fellow employees who pick up on there being a mental health problem may feel anger at the employee for letting personal issues affect the work environment and then avoid the employee or shun them, consciously or unconsciously. Morale in the company plummets and everyone's capabilities fall down. We can begin to see greater absenteeism and rising disability costs too. Maybe the employee eventually is let go and the company loses a very valuable person. And ultimately, the employee is not helped or supported and their condition actually worsens. We have made the case for some action if there is a mental health issue, but how can we know there is one? How do we know that there is likely a mental health problem in the first place? So there are several warning signs that can indicate that a person has a mental health problem. I will categorize certain types just so you can get the general idea. The what the heck just happened to him employee. Your normally energetic, determined, focused, results-oriented, crackerjack employee is suddenly acting anything but. He shows up late, he seems disorganized and lethargic and is not very productive at all. You have a sense that something is up. The I live and breathe work employee. Suddenly this person seems to live at the office and they spend way more time here than they used to. She also appears to work at warp speed for a great length of time over a prolonged period. You might also see in her an out-of-character overconfidence and grandiosity that you didn't before, and also less cooperation. Something is up, you feel. The fading star syndrome. This employee was a real team player, well-liked and likable, dependable, came to all company events and outings, and normally has an excellent attendance record. Suddenly, he is booking off sick quite a bit, and people are noticing that he is less communicative and quite withdrawn and to himself a lot. There is a general loss of interest and involvement at work. Then there's the one with the difficult home life. This one has young kids and a sick spouse. She is absent frequently and has trouble meeting performance targets. It is noticeable that she can't really focus on her work anymore, and she often appears in tears and flustered. She shows increased trouble making decisions and remembering things. The next employee has been acting strange lately. You have heard from 2 different sources that they have smelled alcohol on his breath. Normally, this employee has been responsible and has never shown any previous addiction problem, but there are unexplained absences as of late. You have heard that they are in the process of going through a tumultuous breakup with their partner with whom they have been in a relationship for many years. You can also see an accident-prone employee, sudden increase in accidents or safety difficulties, somebody who complains quite a bit about physical issues, tiredness, unexplained aches and pains. You might also see some strange ideas coming from an employee, sudden anger or defensiveness. So these are some classic types of examples that would indicate some mental health issues. So what you are really looking for is there work suffering and/or are there relationships at work being compromised in some way? You will see a change in work patterns, and these can either be sudden or, as Megan actually described, this can be gradual. It might not be something that's suddenly coming up or something that's obvious that has triggered it. It can be a slow, steady progression. So ask yourself, is the employee's work performance suffering? And also, if this is a person who normally gets along well with others, are they now having trouble in their work relationships? We must be on the lookout for behavioral changes. And remember too, another point I'd like to make is that we're not talking about a bad day or a bad week or someone with a bad attitude, kind of like the office grump. We're actually talking about someone where their employment, behavior and their employment work has actually been affected. Not somebody who is looking to change their job or has some kind of temporary problem. And it's not the typical work stress. It is something more pronounced than all this. But remember that sometimes even what might seem typical and manageable to one of us is not necessarily so for everyone. We all know about unreasonable workloads, pressure to work overtime, workplace harassment and discrimination, which can cause in some a change to performance and behavior, and can eventually lead to an underlying mental health issue. So the message is, know your employees' patterns and see what looks like it may fall outside what is normally seen and expected. Often what makes things even harder is that an employee doesn't want to divulge that they have a mental health issue. And why would this be? Well, we can sort of come up with the reasons on our own. They may not recognize it themselves, so that's denial. But they can also be afraid. They're afraid that their manager or coworker or supervisor will react to it in a negative way. Stigma, we mentioned stigma, any kind of disgrace or dishonor that may come with it that is attached to mental illness societally. And they can also be afraid that it will leave them open to some form of discrimination or limit their opportunities for advancement. And very often they don't know what to say to whom. These are very real problems that they're dealing with, and they are uncertain too as to how to go about handling their problem. Perhaps they don't know if there's an accommodation policy at the office, and if so, how it could help them. Keep in mind, there's a greater chance people will disclose they have a mental health issue if they're confident it will remain private and confidential, if they feel that the company is prepared to respond with accommodation and support to help their needs, and if they believe that the harassment from disclosure will not be tolerated at any level. So now you are fairly confident of an underlying mental health issue because of workplace performance, behavior, or relationships. Now what should employers do? How do you actually go about addressing this problem? Well, one, you arrange for a meeting so you can voice your concerns and offer assistance. This can be a special meeting that is called if you feel that the need to deal with it is pressing, or it can be as part of a regular review process. And the next point I want to make is actually not stressed enough. Prepare, prepare, prepare. It is essential that you prepare for this meeting ahead of time. First of all, what resources does your company actually offer, such as an employee assistance program? Or are there other community services that are available? And there usually are. You should check out the CMHA, which is the Canadian Mental Health Association, that has branches that help employers and employees dealing with mental health issues at the workplace. And have this information at your fingertips that you have what to offer the employee by way of support. A brochure, for instance, about community services is good. Contact information that you have for a helpful professional, or something very tangible that the employee can use to follow up with. Also, do you have formal accommodation policies? If so, offer what can help, and if there is no accommodation policy per se, think about how the person's job might be modified to allow them to continue working, such as flexible work schedules or restructuring tasks like we talked about in the Jane example in the beginning. I was called in a situation, in an employment situation, where a skilled worker, she was at the mid-level of employment. She was crying in the bathroom all the time. She was leaving her desk constantly. She had a lot of trouble focusing on tasks. And it turns out that her supervisor was a very abrupt type of person whose style was loud and kind of commanding. And we talked through it, and after we worked things through and we unpacked the situation, so it turns out that this employee had been harassed at her last job by a very belligerent boss, and her window at her office was facing the place of employment that she had previously worked and been harassed at. So a simple change of office placement and a talk with a supervisor adopting some softer methods made things considerably different for her department, and for the whole company. You want to make the person feel very safe and comfortable in the meeting, because this is important, because you want to minimize their stress. So while you need to be honest and upfront and professional about approaching them regarding their performance, you also need to convey a sense that you are approaching them with a degree of concern and care. In other words, don't stress them out more than they already are, because it's a highly stressful situation. And always start with a positive. What are the person's strong points? What do they bring to the company? Discuss how they are an asset. Talk about this before you go into the areas of concern. So it might go something like this. Hey Max, you're a really important part of our organization. You never miss deadlines. You're one of our top performers. But we have been noticing lately that you haven't met your usual standards and have made some critical errors, this kind of thing. You don't start off with, what the heck is happening to you? We don't recognize you anymore. It's also important to have some open-ended questions for the employee, like, what do you feel would help you work better? What you want is to encourage the person themselves to come up with ideas that would best support and accommodate them. Make sure you have a brief follow-up meeting on a regular basis to see how things are going, and once the employee has had a chance to get some help. And you want to set new performance goals if necessary. And then make sure that you actually have the follow-up meeting, because what happens is often is that things get back to normal and then everyone forgets about it. It's very important that you have that actual follow-up meeting and discuss what has happened and where you're at now, and then where they're likely to go in the future. Now, you may feel frustrated with the situation, but your approach is really vitally important. In the old days, we would send an employee home, hushed, little acknowledgement as to what happened, and this no longer meets the standard of what is required. How you react will set the tone for things to come, and you can make whatever happens next as smooth as possible or as bumpy as possible. So some of the pitfalls. What you do not want to do is probe into the problem. Some might share willingly, and some might be reluctant to discuss their issues. It is not your job to uncover the root of things or to diagnose. You want to help the employee get the right professional help they need. It's good to have some professional names on hand the employee can speak with about their troubles. And if you have an EAP, reiterate the confidentiality of the arrangements. Your approach should be one of concern as a workplace performance issue, and you want to convey a sense of openness and flexibility so that you can encourage productivity. It's always best to make sure that employees know what is expected of them in terms of responsibilities and duties. Have them clearly stated so there's no misinformation, and encourage their active participation and decision making. Why? Because if they are more active and involved in the decision-making as to how to go about dealing with this problem, the more likely they are able to carry it through with minimal resistance. And don't promise the moon, because as talented as I am sure you all are, you cannot deliver it. At least not yet, until there's another app on our phone that I don't know about, and then maybe things will change, who knows. So times are changing. Companies that are psychologically safe is no longer an opt-in or an opt-out situation. It is not a voluntary stance. This is not a choice, but rather is a new standard. And for the first time, I think employers are faced with at least the social, if not legal, although it's a little bit murky it seems, responsibility to make practical efforts to avoid reasonably foreseeable injury to their employees' health. So what's health? Good health doesn't just entail a good sweat in the gym. It also involves good psychological health, and good psychological health is also good business. Studies have shown that with a mentally healthy workforce comes lower medical costs, lower absenteeism, and higher productivity. Psychiatric claims are the fastest growing category of long-term disability in Canada. Depression is about to become the leading cause of disability worldwide, now second only to heart disease. So just for a couple of stats, I know Megan has mentioned some, but mental illness is going to affect us all sooner or later. About 20%, 20 or 25% will experience it in their lifetime. That's 1 in 5 people who will experience it directly. This is based on studies of those who report it, but many do not report it, so it is likely the percentage is actually higher in reality. Many of us might not experience a mental health problem ourselves, but it may be a colleague, a friend, or a family member with an issue. And the next statistics are interesting because we see the disconnect between employers and employees. 33% of managers say they have mental health training, and 81% of them say they are comfortable talking to employees about it. But less than 30% of employees feel the managers know much about mental health at all, and more than a third say they are not comfortable talking to their employers about mental health issues. So clearly, it's time to change our approach of how we are effectively dealing with mental health in the workplace and how our efforts are being perceived. So let's talk a bit about stigma. Some of those who suffer from mental illness, they fear being labeled, they fear being feared, and they fear being reduced in status. These employees think that if they talk about it, they will lose their job or a promotion. Some even feel guilty for being away from work, and some feel completely unsupported when they do reveal their problems. They can also feel a tremendous degree of shame. We need to change our behaviors and attitudes towards those suffering with mental illness. It is the negative attitudes and behaviors that prevent an employer and others from understanding how to deal with mental illness in the workplace. Often the employee becomes very isolated and alone. As employers, as managers, as HR people, we need to prioritize the promotion of good, productive work environment, good physical and good mental health. We also need to recognize, support, and help a person with a mental health problem. Help them get the help required so they can do the best job they can. An employee's wellness benefits all of us when it comes to productivity and morale. And the last point I want to talk about is communication. We can all have the information at our fingertips. We can all know about our legal obligation, what makes the most business sense, what strategies should I use to support the employees. But the real question is, how can I effectively create and communicate a physically and emotionally safe workplace that respects all individuals? It's tricky. You do not always know who is suffering, and we often see somebody struggling who is not really sick enough to be at home and yet not quite healthy enough to be fully present at work. Be informed about your company policies, and if they are not up to the standards they should be, work on changing them. Know what the implications are regarding mental health issues in the workplace. Become aware of how what you say and how you behave affects others, and this will help you in addressing mental health issues as they arise. Above all, consult with the therapists and counselors and professionals who can help with understanding emotional difficulties and offer support for you and your employers and employees, to maintain balanced attitudes and actions in life. Let's be aware, let's understand, let's know about mental health issues so we can talk about it and be heard and feel respected and achieve better health and well-being. Thank you.